This is the CNC Router Tips Podcast, episode 29.
I believe they were sophomores at a vocational school, and I led them through the shop that I'd walked for years, past the machines that I've walked by for years, and explained what each one did, and explained what the customer's parts were on the machine and where the customer's parts were going to go. And the look of wonderment and the look of excitement in their eyes, it fueled my fire.
This is the CNC Router Tips Podcast, a show which answers one question from you, the listener, about CNC router tables, CNC software, hardware, web hosting, and business. I'll help you get started in your CNC hobby or business and help you cut through the confusion.
Today's episode is sponsored by themakersguide.com. The Maker's Guide. Useful tools for makers.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the CNC Router Tips Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Griggs, and I'm very glad that you took the time today to listen into our show where we talk about CNC router tables and how to use them to create a passion, a business, or a hobby. Today's guest is someone that I admire very much. It's Jon Berard. Jon has been very active in the maker community. Jon runs the MakerCast is the short name, but the actual name of his podcast is the Podcast for Makers. And Jon has been interviewing makers of all sorts of really unique and amazing projects, and talking to them about, what they're passionate about and why they do what they do. And I really have enjoyed getting to know Jon. I was recently a guest on his podcast, and in fact, that was the first podcast I was ever a guest on. And Jon made me feel very comfortable and welcome in the episode and took away a lot of the anxiety that I had about that. So I'm really looking forward to having Jon on the show so that you can enjoy him, because I think he's a very unique, very knowledgeable person. So without any further ado, let's get into the episode and speak with Jon Berard. Hello, everyone. This is Bill Griggs from CNC Router Tips, and I'm glad to have Jon Berard with us today. Jon has been really instrumental in the maker community, and I really have enjoyed getting to know him better. I was recently a guest on his podcast, and now he's on our podcast, and I think you're going to enjoy this. How are you doing today, Jon?
Everything is really good today, and I appreciate being here. Thank you, Bill.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, Jon. Where are you from?
I'm from Massachusetts. I've lived here my entire life, and I'm in my low 40s, married with 3 kids, and I've actually worked in manufacturing my entire adult life.
Excellent. You have quite a prolific group of individuals that you've interviewed on your podcast. And for folks who aren't familiar with your podcast, tell us a little bit about your podcast.
Well, I run the Podcast for Makers, and it's come to be known as MakerCast for short. And I strive to have guests at all levels. And what I mean by that is some of my most recent episodes have had some great names in the space. In fact, the founder and CEO of Inventables was a recent guest. And I've also had younger men that are really just starting out on their journey. I had a young man that was recently graduated from college as an engineer, and he was in the working world for a little while and decided to go off and do his own thing in making on YouTube. So it really was both ends of the spectrum, where somebody was brand new into the space versus somebody who is setting the tone for the space, and everywhere in between. I don't try to stick to one group. For example, I love listening to the stories of woodworkers. I love listening to the stories of machinists, and I love listening to stories of people that are executives or managers, or even people that are in the space. Even though they might push a pencil, they still have value that they can bring to the audience. So I like to provide a platform for all those types of people.
Yeah, I find that the maker community is so diverse that it really almost defies description. There are people who make any number of things from fiber art, sewing, woodworking, acrylics, just anything you can think of. There's somebody who is really passionate about doing that, and they love sharing their experiments and experience with people. And I love that about the maker community.
It is a very strong community. One of the things that I found is many of the individuals that show what they do on YouTube are some of the most outgoing and friendly and eager to speak individuals, and I love having them on my show because they're comfortable and they're ready to speak, and they know what they want to say. But that doesn't discount that I might seek somebody else that has a story that is working a 9 to 5, or maybe more appropriately a 7 to 6 in manufacturing, where they have the passion to be there all day long, and maybe it's CNC machining or welding or that sort of thing. And so what I like about talking with makers is it makes me feel good about knowing that where this country is pointed, that we can have people that are content and happy to make things with their own hands, and that's that's the heart of us, is to be able to produce something and have something to show for a long day's work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, you worked in manufacturing most of your life, and do you find that makers operate on a higher level or the same or lower level than the typical manufacturing?
I'd say it's all levels, and I can say that by in any trade, in any profession, you'll have people that are new at it, mm-hmm. and they might be eager and want to dive right in and get going, but make a lot of mistakes. Now, that doesn't mean that they're lower. It just means that they're earlier in their journey. And somebody might make a career path change in their 30s or 40s, and they're going to be young at it and make mistakes. But what I like about talking with the makers, I already talked about what I liked about talking with the makers. What I find with makers is the passion comes through when they start talking about what they like to do.
Yeah, it's amazing because you can hear the excitement in their voice, and just watch their hand gestures, accelerate and everything when they're talking about what it is that they love, and it never gets old to me.
One of the guests that I had on fairly recently was an engineer by trade, and he worked all day long in his engineering role, but he never got to make anything. And so what he had done on the weekends was made himself a machine shop, and he got tired of using the lathe that he had, and he went out and he found a World War II era lathe, and then turned the restoration of that lathe into his maker project, because he knew at the end, not only would he have the story of refurbishing the lathe, but he'd also have the lathe and be able to use it.
I love that type of video. I spend way too much time on YouTube. You may be familiar with the trend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's difficult to spend time on YouTube when you have 3 kids, but the good thing is that my oldest son and I will enjoy the same types of videos on YouTube.
Mm-hmm. There are makers in all walks of life as far as YouTube goes. I spend a lot of time watching videos from, for instance, NYC CNC, mm-hmm. Or Jon Grimsmo from Knife Making Tuesday, I think he calls that series.
Mm-hmm.
And it's totally unrelated to a CNC router table, which is what I generally that's my hot button. But the machining and the skill and the level of dedication that those guys have, they're both teachers, if you will, of what it is they're doing. They pull back the curtain and show us, what's going into the projects they're making. That's the kind of entertainment that I really enjoy because I learn a lot from it.
Mm-hmm. I wouldn't say it was unrelated, especially in the case of like NYC CNC. Just because he uses a Tormach mill, he's still using inch per rev. There's still spindle speed. There's still that world can carry over into your world.
Yeah, and someday it will. I'm looking up at my my wall where I've got a picture of a Tormach mill on there, to sit there and visualize having in my shop someday.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's kind of the cool part about YouTube for a lot of these is being able to see something and maybe imagine that you might have that or be doing that thing. And there are a lot of projects that I've just watched because it's sheerly just gorgeous to watch, the craftsmanship. And I know I'll never do it, but watching how they did it is really entertaining for me.
Mm-hmm. I've had a few guests such as Jimmy DeRusta. Mm-hmm. I've had Mark Spagnuolo, the Wood Whisperer. I've had Matt Cremona, who now works with Mark Spagnuolo in the Wood Talk podcast. Mm-hmm. And their work is impeccable, not discounting all the other beautiful work that all my other guests have done. But to watch their videos is, it really is quite enjoyable. And then to come and hear their stories mm-hmm. without having a video program, that's where I think that my show fits in. Because I don't ever want to take away from the visual beauty, the visual art that they do. That's their world. I would rather be the one that brings the story to the ears of the listener for when you're on your commute or on your dog walk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've done quite a bit of conversation with Mark and Nicole, his wife, on a forum that I'm in, and they're amazing, good people, and I really enjoy the high level of video production that they put into their to everything that they do. Mm-hmm. So yeah, haven't had the pleasure of meeting them in person, but it's a small world and getting smaller. So one day.
Indeed, it is a small world. I can't wait until I can meet a few of the folks that I've had on.
Mm-hmm. So let's change subjects for just a second. Now, what is the most unusual project that you've heard about that someone has worked on?
You're asking about someone who may have been a guest on the show, a
Sure.
story that they've told?
Yes.
I think a mutual friend of ours, Diami Plotke, mm-hmm. had a story about a quilt rack that he handmade. As far as being a unique or different story, there's so many that I'm gonna play the there's so many card. I did have one guest that he does make something very unique, and it just popped into my head. And the gentleman's name is Tony Davis. Mm-hmm. And the way I came about Tony's information was, of all places, Martha Stewart's website listed him as a potential, like a contestant in an American-made type of contest. And what he makes is carving boards mm-hmm. and signage out of whiskey barrels or used whiskey barrels. And it was very interesting to have a long conversation with him because I don't know how I got almost all the way through the episode, and then I realized that he doesn't sell them so much as he gives them away. And it just caught me off guard. Huh. It wasn't his full-time gig that he was a maker to make this. If memory serves, he was a law enforcement officer, and in the end, he spoke of how he gives his stuff away so that other people less fortunate would have something to give away as gifts.
Wow.
And I had this big lump in my throat, and I couldn't talk because he just took me off guard.
Wow, that is just inspiring. Wow, that is giving from the heart. It's evident that we've been sitting here talking for a few minutes now about maker this, maker that. What is a maker?
I look at it that anyone that makes things with their hands, and that could be woodworking, machining, welding, forging, baking. Some might even say it's as far as somebody who makes a story with words or a story with video.
Yeah.
I believe it in a big category like that.
Yeah, there's one fella, and the name is escaping me at the moment, and I apologize, but I'm sure you'll know who I'm talking about, who does stop animation of his woodworking projects, and they're amazing. So you might see a log come into the shop, and then suddenly it's sliced into several boards, and then the boards dance across the floor and get up on the compound miter saw and get chopped into even smaller pieces. And he does his whole video that way.
I can't think of who that is.
Well, now I'm going to go on a search after this podcast is over, and I will remember his name before the end of it. But just the cinematography in that thing, it is just amazing. But that's another way of showing people what went into a project, and that's kind of the unique part of it for me. Seeing how was that made? What went into that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think a maker is a general term, and I suppose I'm also learning about what it means to be a maker during this whole process. Mm-hmm. It was probably 2013. The state of Massachusetts, I don't want to say this. We take part in what's called Manufacturing Day. And the company that I was working for is a large CNC machine shop, and we decided to open the doors and invite in some vocational schools and public schools and just the general public. Mm-hmm. And the day before, the guys that were organizing it, they realized that there was going to be a lot of people moving through all at once. And so they asked me if I wouldn't mind leading a tour or two through the shop. And I didn't think anything of it. And I said, yeah, absolutely. And so that next day came, and the buses arrived, and there was anticipation in the air, and there was excitement. And I got my group of, I believe they were sophomores at a vocational school, and I led them through the shop that I'd walked for years, past the machines that I've walked by for years, and explained what each one did, and explained what the customer's parts were on the machine, and potentially where the customer's parts were going to go. Mm-hmm. And the look of wonderment and the look of excitement in their eyes, it fueled my fire. And I had always been a fan of podcasts. And so what I thought was, gosh, if there was some way that I could get that feeling, if I could get that excitement every day, as opposed to just doing it on Manufacturing Day. And so I went through the remainder of 2013 and all the way through 2014 until October, when Manufacturing Day came around, just doing nothing, just spinning my wheels, thinking about how can I do more. And so when that second Manufacturing Day that I took part in came around, and I got my group of juniors or sophomores or whatever they were that year, it really gave me the kick in the pants that I needed to get going and launch the podcast. So what I did was I reached out to a few people in manufacturing that I knew, and several people that I didn't know. And I just said, would you mind taking a chance and have a conversation with me? And that was through November of 14. And then the show launched in iTunes in February of 15. those early days were pretty rough because I was very self-conscious about the ums and ahs that I was saying in the podcast, and so my editing was like 4 hours of editing for a 1 hour episode, and it's just it was ugly. It was painful, but I figured I should just get the being bad at it out of the way early. And it took me all the way through the summer and got up to September. The first week of September, I had made the plan that I was going to make the show weekly. So in order to do that, I had to get my editing chops almost down to not needing to do very much editing at all. And so first week of September, up till now, the show has been airing weekly.
That is amazing. I know what goes into that. I'm also in the process of doing massive edits on, the recordings just to take out ums and ahs. And realistically, people speak with ums and ahs, and nobody hears them except you.
Mm-hmm.
And my effort would be better spent in just getting out better content and better, guests and letting them speak in their natural voice, because I think my listeners enjoy hearing from a variety of people, and they want to know, what does he really sound like? Not be overproduced. You have now the radio announcer voice, actually. So yours is liquid to the ears. So I love that. It's just very smooth. So if you're worried about your tone, don't be.
Well, I thank you for the compliment.
Yeah.
It's been a long road, and I'm by no means perfect, and perfect never comes. So I do thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, I got started about the same time you decided to go weekly, and I realized at that point that my first few podcasts were going to be very rough, and I talked to Joel Bogus. He has the Relaunch podcast. That was his thing, and I took a class from him, and he said, just be your natural self, and everything else will work out. So just go ahead and do it.
Now, I know we connected through a mutual friend, and when you were on my show, you told the story of how it was a bet or a dare. Does your audience know that story?
I don't believe that I have shared that story with...
Have I gone and flipped my interview onto you?
It's very possible.
Today's episode is sponsored by The Maker's Guide, creator of the Triple Edge Finder. Get the edge you need, save time and frustration on your CNC project, and make setup a snap. Save time and material. Set up your workpiece on your CNC router table faster than ever. Accurately set your Z-axis height first time, every time. Automatically locate the corner or edge of a workpiece. Reset your starting point in the middle of a program. Quality crafted right here in the USA on US-made CNC machines. Get the edge you need today. Go to www.themakersguide.com/edge. The Maker's Guide. Useful tools for makers.
When you were on my show, you told the story of how it was a bet or a dare. Does your audience know that story?
I don't believe that I have shared that story with...
Have I gone and flipped my interview onto you?
It's very possible, and I don't know if I would allow it, but very quickly I will explain that I was at the Podcast Movement Conference the day before the conference started. And I'm not a drinker, but I was trying to step outside my comfort zone, so I went down to the bar where everyone else was gathered. And I met a bunch of other people who were there for the conference, and they were there early. And one of the gentlemen and I got to talking, and we were both discussing how we had an idea for a podcast, but neither of us had launched our podcast. And so as the evening went on, and there was no alcohol involved in this decision, we pledged to each other that we would launch our podcast by the following Friday after the conference was over. So that put a real definite, time crunch on the entire process. And so we both we're successful in doing that. And I think, having that looming deadline and, the pressure of knowing that if I didn't do it or if Matt didn't do it, we'd be letting each other down. We stuck through it. So I got off the plane on Tuesday and built a website and signed up for iTunes, and the rest is history. I launched Friday before midnight, and I was very pleased with the first episode for as little preparation as we had. So that's the story.
And now they know.
Yeah, now I'll get you back for that. No. Yeah, so that's how that all got started. And it's funny because, podcasting is just one medium that we reach our people, our tribe, or the folks that we would love to hang out with every day, our listeners. It could have been anything else, any other format, but I knew if I was as interested in CNC as I was, that there had to be someone else out there, and that I needed to put out a podcast to see if I could find them, and they're coming. So I think that's great, and I'm pretty sure that's why you do what you do with the podcast for makers.
I guess I went off on a tangent when I threw it back on you, but the story continues that the reason that I wanted to do what I did was so that these kids had a better understanding of not needing to just go blindly into college with no idea of what was going to happen on the other side of 4 years. And I'm not poo-pooing college. What I'm saying is having a plan, having an understanding, even if that involves get out into the working world and try a few things before you commit to higher education, that has value, that has merit. And at the same time, manufacturing in the United States is suffering what's known as the skills gap, where manufacturing firms cannot find enough qualified or capable people to learn the equipment, run the equipment, and make great things. So I just wanted to present the problem and present the solution in a different light, in a medium that I was hopeful that other people would find entertaining. Mm-hmm. So whereas I went into the CNC way of thinking, that didn't come out right. When I went into it from trying to attract young people into CNC machining, that would be the career path. What I found was I didn't have to pigeonhole myself to just that I should also look at 3D printing. I should also look at woodworking. I should also look at lasers and forging and on and on and on. And so what it's been up to this point has been a wide range of guests that all have really the same type of story, that you can do what makes you feel good, what makes you filled with passion, and you can either do it part-time or you can do it full-time. And I think that's why it's a good fit for me to come on your show and just share what I have to say, so that somebody that is very interested in CNC routers might have that same idea. You speak an awful lot about turning it into a business. And it could be a part-time business while you get your chops down, and then as you take off and start to really understand what you're doing and start to upgrade your equipment and get into it, that you can make that leap and turn it into a full-time career. And I think the two shows work in harmony that way.
I agree. I think that getting the kids' minds to consider alternatives to the college education is actually crucial, because now I work with a college as an adjunct instructor in a mechanical engineering technology program. So I get to see a lot of the kids who aren't necessarily geared towards a conventional 4-year education, but the 2-year education for them going into the machining trades is perfect because they're hands-on people. They like to get, into things, see how, take things apart, put them together, design new things. Mm-hmm. And it's that passion doesn't always get transmitted in high school. And there are programs like Next Robotics or, many other programs that kind of inspire that. But, with shrinking school budgets and all of that, it's difficult to give these kids enough opportunities to see programs like manufacturing and, to consider that as a career. So I'm really happy that you're able to do that through your podcast and through your efforts.
Well, I thank you. If there's anything that I can say that would have your listeners find a couple of interesting episodes that they might want to try, I thought of the Other Mill is a desktop CNC. There's also the Boxy, and those are some early episodes that I might be a little rough. And then there's also Todd Bailey. His episode, he speaks of the vector software. Mm-hmm. And of course your episode, and then the most recent to date, as of when you and I are doing this, is of course the Zach Kaplan, which is the founder of Inventables. And those stories might be good for your tried and true listeners. Mm-hmm. And there's some other stuff on there that they might find entertaining as well.
Oh yeah, I highly recommend that people get out their earbuds and take a listen to the Podcast for Makers, or MakerCast for short, because I think it's a great program. I listen to it regularly. So one of the things that I wanted to discuss with you, John, Maker Faire. Now, for those who aren't aware, Maker Fairs are gatherings of makers that they hold all over the country, and various size events. I went to one at the Henry Ford Museum in Michigan, and there's one in New York City. Well, recently I have interviewed in another episode Jesse Hewson, and he's involved in the Maker Faire in Rochester. Mm-hmm. Are you familiar with the Maker Faire there?
I'm familiar with what Jesse's done with the Maker Faire in Rochester because he was able to speak on it when he was a guest on my show, and we've also gone back and forth offline. Mm-hmm. And there was some guests that I've had that are pretty big in the space that were speakers there this past year.
Yeah, I know this year that Jimmy Duresti was one of the people that was there.
Mm-hmm. And Bob Claggett.
Yeah. And it's very wild. And I happened to be out of the state on the day of the Maker Faire, or else I would have been there. It's kind of funny. But I was extended an invitation to speak at that Maker's Faire. And I think perhaps...
How do you want to say it, Bill?
I think perhaps maybe you're also thinking of speaking there. Is that correct?
Were you promised that I was going to be there, so that's why you said yes?
Well, I think I was trying to pull your twist your arm into it. But no, I think you were already promised. Yes, I was promised that you would be there. Will you be there?
Jesse was nice enough to extend the invitation to me as well, and I will be there, yes.
Oh, fantastic. So we'll actually get a chance to meet in person there. Now, we don't have the dates yet. Set. Actually, we do, but I don't have
sometime in November, I believe.
Yeah. It's November of 2016, and just because that's how I roll. The Maker's Faire will be November 19th, 2016. So if you're in the Rochester, New York area, and you want to have a great experience and a great day, we'll be there. Will you?
We will be there. We'll be there with bells on.
All right. Excellent. Now, is there anything that you haven't been asked that you would love to share with our audience, John?
I don't think so. I think I'm very appreciative. I know that I'm very appreciative for the opportunity to come on and talk about my little show. A little bit different audience, but again, I think there's some overlap. So if people might find it interesting, they can come on over and have a listen.
Yeah, I highly encourage that. And how will people find your podcast in iTunes?
You know, it's funny. Somebody said to me once that I couldn't find your podcast in iTunes. And I said, well, what are you looking for? Are you looking for woodworking? Are you looking for machining? Are you looking for a machine shop? Are you looking for 3D printing? What search terms are you using? Because I come up in most of those. And he says, oh, I used your name. I said, my name? Why would you search for my name in iTunes? So if you like machining, if you like woodworking, if you like 3D printing, if you like a career in manufacturing, and all those related search terms, you'll find MakerCast. Beautiful.
And it'll be under MakerCast, not the podcast for makers?
It's both. It shows both ways. Mm-hmm. And the web address is podcastformakers.com. If you go to podcastformakers.com/gift, GIFT, I made a download where there's several of our related podcasts, including yours, where people can have a listen to similar podcasts to what we have. A lot of woodworking, a lot of making, a lot of great people that put on some really great shows.
That's excellent. Now that's podcast for FOR makers?
Correct.
Yeah. Podcastformakers.com/gift. Okay. You should check that out, folks. I will put that in my resources page. So folks in a future episode will be able to easily find that, and it'll also be in the show notes for your episode, which will be episode 29. So it would be cncroutertips.com/29. The number's 29.
I always feel like I should ask, is there anything that you haven't asked?
Yeah. Yeah, it's always funny because you get into these things, and there's so many things that when this podcast episode is over, I was like, oh, I should have talked to John about that. And, it's just what it is. That gives me a good excuse to ask you back in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe we can figure out some nutball project that we could collaborate on over the course of both shows. That would be fun.
That would be very interesting. I have a murky vision about something to do with how do you quote your work? Because for the vast majority of my manufacturing life, I've been in the sales and project management end of things. Mm-hmm. So I see somehow, someday, being a resource to people as to when they want to turn their business into something full-time, something that drives revenue, something that's a passion project. So maybe someday in the future to be along those lines.
I am going to hold you to that and extend an invitation for you to come back at some point in the future to talk about that exact subject. Maybe if you're willing, with another person at the same time. We could have a first multi-person podcast episode in the CNC Router Tips forum. What do you think?
I'm open to anything.
All right, excellent. John, how do folks? What is the best way for folks to contact you?
I seem to be the most active on Twitter, and that's Podcast for Makers, and that's the number 4 if you're using it on Twitter. Mm-hmm. You could also do the web address that we already talked about, podcastformakers, FOR.com. That's about it. I tend to dip in and out of most social media avenues, but Twitter seems to be the one that makes my phone go off the most.
Mm-hmm. Okay, excellent. So one last question. If you couldn't fail, if you had all the resources that you needed, all the equipment, everything, the stars aligned perfectly, what project would you be working on in the next 30 days?
I wouldn't know the answer to what the project was because I would want to be in the space where it was quoting jobbing work on a routine basis so that it was new and different and exciting all the time. So there's a cheat answer. But I would, if I was going to have all the equipment up, running, and ready, I would want to be able to make sure that I have a diverse customer base, and I was working on a multitude of things to keep it interesting.
That's the most pragmatic answer we've had so far. So I'm going to go with that. That's awesome.
I'm probably also the first guest that hasn't had a CNC router.
No. Well, yes, but...
No, but yes.
Yeah, it won't take long before you'll have one. It's inevitable. And that's the episode we want to hear about. Yeah. What was your first week with a CNC router like? That's awesome. Hey, any manufacturers out there want to send John a router?
I just hung up with Inventables and I didn't get one, so the door's still open.
All right. Well, you just never know.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, John, for coming on the CNC Router Tips podcast. And I really do appreciate you doing me this favor.
I appreciate being asked to be a part of this, and I wish you nothing but continued success. I love your show, and keep doing it, please.
We'll do our best. I often mention many different types of software during the episodes, and hardware and cutters, and it can get a little confusing. So what I did was I put together a page on my website, cncroutertips.com/resources. And on that page, I list all sorts of resources there, from books to tools to software, all the things that I use that make my CNC experience better and easier. And I hope you'll check it out. So again, it's cncroutertips.com/resources. Now, if you'd like to have your question featured on the air, here's how. Need help? Ask me about your CNC router question on my podcast, the CNC Router Tips Podcast. I'll be glad to help or try and get you the help you need. I want this podcast to be a fun and personal experience for everyone, and helpful. So let's keep it real and ask sensible questions. Please use common sense and show courtesy to everyone. That way everybody wins. Here are some guidelines to ensure that your question is qualified to be featured on the show. Please keep your questions under 1 minute in length. If it goes a little over that, that's fine, but don't ramble. If you have a website and URL, you're allowed to share it, but only once during the recording. Spammy or disrespectful or deeply private questions will not be considered for the podcast. If you need to ask more than one question, just make each question a separate voicemail. Thanks again, everyone, for tuning in and listening to the CNC Router Tips podcast. If you'd like to join our free mailing list, you can go to cncroutertips.com, and there's a link right there on the top of the page which tells you how to do that. Thank you so much, and have a great day.